You ever get the feeling the city walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating your soul? You crave wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe chase some elk, fish a private stream. Well, listen up. There's a whole world out there, and finding your own piece of it just got easier. Head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, you name it. Search by acreage, location, the kind of hunting or fishing you dream of. Land.com. It's where the adventure begins.
Hey, it is Ryan Seacrest. There's something so thrilling about playing Chumba Casino. Maybe it's the simple reminder that with a little luck, anything is possible. ChumbaCasino.com has hundreds of social casino-style games to choose from with new game releases each week. Play for free anytime, anywhere for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. Join me in the fun. Sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Good morning, everybody. Corey Hughes, Bloody History. I hope everybody is preparing for a safe New Year's Eve, which will be, tomorrow? But for now, we are going to continue talking about Marguerite Oswald, one of the most duplicitous women in history. Literally. So, before we get back to a mother in history, which we're about 2/3 of the way through, let me just talk for a minute about Marguerite Oswald's activities and how we know that she's a liar and completely full of shit. So, she admits that she was, in 1942, a telephone switchboard operator for the Navy in Algiers, Louisiana. Okay? Just in making that statement alone, she tips her hand more than she realizes. So, in 1941 was the creation of the WAVES program, the Women in the Navy. Now, I haven't spent enough time on this to know this answer for sure, but it appears as though that when women joined the Navy back in 40, 41, 42, they needed people to get in because of the war effort. But not everybody, if I'm interpreting this correctly, women who didn't join, like I guess these women could join full on to go be in the Navy, but the ones who didn't, they needed to staff the various bases for various positions, they brought women in under the WAVES program. And if I'm not mistaken, the WAVES program was not a full-on commitment to the Navy for like a 4 or 6 year period like men would do, but it was a short-term commitment, a year or two, to fill certain positions, a lot of secretarial stuff. And Marguerite Oswald claims that she was a telephone switchboard operator. Well, I'm sorry, Marguerite, but when I did my digging into the WAVES program, they specifically brought up, and I couldn't believe this, is a video on YouTube. You can find it on YouTube. I couldn't fucking believe it, but they specifically brought up the telephone switchboard operators because then they made a joke about women keeping secrets, which is hilarious. Because in order to be a telephone switchboard operator, number one, you had to have been in the WAVES program. You had to go through WAVES training. And you had to have a secret or some sort of classified level of top secret, classified, right? You had to have a certain level of that, because if you had Navy guys calling other Navy guys discussing top secret shit, you had access to their conversation, like straight up. You were able to hear what they're saying. And so this video made it pretty clear that if you're going to be a telephone switchboard operator in the Navy under the WAVES program, that you're going to have some kind of clearance. You're going to have some kind of top secret clearance, whether it's secret, top secret, classified, I don't fucking know. But it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? So Marguerite Oswald, if she was a telephone switchboard operator, a couple things that we can deduce from that. Number one, she was under the WAVES program, 100%. And number two, she had some sort of clearance. I'm not even going to get into the fact that those addresses are bad. The addresses in Algiers, Louisiana are no good. Because they're in New York City. That's why. There's another address, though. So when Lee Harvey Oswald was allegedly at the Trinity School in the Bronx, which is a Lutheran school. I got to look more into these Lutherans. For some reason, Marguerite Oswald put a lot of stock into this Lutheran thing. It meant a lot to her, but she didn't go to church because she's a hypocrite and a liar. But the Lutherans kept popping up, just like the Unitarians. I need to look more into them because they pop up again with the White Russians. So there's some weird Lutheran and fucking, Unitarian shit going on here, which I will eventually get to. But it appears to me that Marguerite Oswald was clearly involved in the Waves program if she was a telephone operator. And she clearly went to New York. But one of the addresses that pops up for the Trinity School, I find a different address that she allegedly lived at when going to the Trinity School that doesn't jive with the other 3 or 4 addresses we know of her having in New York. This I got from an old article from the 1960s. But the thing that caught me off guard about it was that when I Googled that address in New York, the address didn't come up in New York. I couldn't find that address in New York. The address that she allegedly lived at when Lee went to the Trinity School. Because the place where she stayed was on the same road as the Trinity School. The number was only off by a couple digits, meaning it was within a couple blocks of the Trinity School. But the weird thing is, when I looked up that address, it came up. If you just put in the address without the city, it'll bring you the most requested Google search for that address, and it came up in North Carolina, in a small city. I forget what the town was offhand. This is all stuff on my to-do list to dig into. But it popped up in North Carolina, and it popped up in a city that had 3 different phone numbers connected to the Martin Luther King assassination. It had connections to, Camp Lejeune, which is in North Carolina. And it had a couple other people living there who were connected to Navy intelligence that I just came across in a simple Google search and newspapers.com. So I don't know what that means. And I have too much stuff to figure out before I even get to that. But this address that she allegedly lived at in New York, which is on the same road as the Trinity School, when you just Google it by itself, pops up as a somewhat significant town in North Carolina, which I don't get. I don't get that at all. So did she go to New York for the Waves program and then was sent to North Carolina to do some kind of training? I don't know. I just don't know. But see, remember, we have, and I'm convinced now, I am definitely convinced that Lillian Moret played a much larger role in the handling of Marguerite's children, in the putting them in the Bethlehem Children's Asylum, the orphanage. And so, as far as I'm concerned, Lillian Moret was directly involved in some of we have to take a look at some of the handwriting, like on the applications for the Bethlehem School, and compare that to other known Marguerite handwritings, because I'm starting to get the feeling that some of these Marguerite handwritings were done by Lillian Moret. Lillian Moret is clearly the woman who John Armstrong mistakenly identified as the false Marguerite at 126 Exchange Place. To me, I looked at that picture, and then I found the other picture, the only other known picture of Lillian Moret, and it's clearly the same woman, aged 6 or 7 years. So that kind of throws a lot of Armstrong's work right out the fucking window. The woman who would be the real Marguerite Oswald imposter, the real fake, okay? So the real Marguerite Oswald imposter, who we all know who she looks like, wears the glasses, has the mole under the eye. She does also, when you look at her interviews, she's got those slanted 45-degree eyebrows, just like Margaret Keating. But the more I dig into this thing, the more I think that Margaret Keating is irrelevant. Why she had Margaret Oswald on her name in the directory in 55, 56 in New Orleans, same time that Marguerite Oswald should be staying at 126 Exchange Place. Why she did that, I don't know. Why that happened, I don't know. Was it a clerical error? I just don't know. But that woman, Lillian Moret, when you look at the pictures of Lillian and Marguerite Oswald when they were teenagers, they're clearly about the same height, right? So Lillian Moret is in the 5'7", 5'8" range, whereas the Marguerite Oswald imposter is much shorter than that, probably 5'3", maybe 5'4", same height as Jack Valenti. So that woman that Armstrong liked to show, since he's dead as fuck, as the Marguerite Oswald imposter at 126 Exchange Place, definitely not the Marguerite Oswald imposter. It's definitely Lillian Moret. And also there's a photograph of the real Marguerite living at 126 Exchange Place, where she's dressed up like in an Indian costume for Carnival. So the question is, what year was that picture taken of her in the outfit for Carnival? Was it 54? Was it 55? It had better have been in 55, because in 54, Armstrong has the fake Marguerite living there with Harvey Oswald, which makes sense to me, because as I'm still piecing this together, what it appears is as though once Harvey Oswald started to get in trouble up in...
You ever get the feeling the city walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating your soul? You crave wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe chase some elk, fish a private stream. Well, listen up. There's a whole world out there, and finding your own piece of it just got easier. Head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forest, mountains, you name it. Search by acreage, location, the kind of hunting or fishing you dream of. Land.com. It's where the adventure begins.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
New York City. Him and the fake Marguerite dipped out of town. They left and went from... they went from New York City, where they were living at, 89th or something, whatever that address was up there. They went from there to North Dakota, Stanley, North Dakota. Why exactly they went to Stanley, North Dakota is still a mystery. There's some intelligence things happening in North Dakota at the time, and there's some other connections to the Oswalds and the Claverys in North Dakota, but I'm still working out details on that. But to me, it does appear as though once the heat was on with Harvey Oswald because he wasn't attending school, they dipped, and they dipped to North Dakota, July and August. However, they will make it down to New Orleans in September. Now, John Armstrong is convinced that Harvey Oswald began school at Beauregard in September of 1953. I don't see any evidence for that. I have not seen any evidence for that whatsoever. It just doesn't... I mean, I'm leaving open the possibility, but I think he's misinterpreting the school records, particularly when at Beauregard, because when you have two different records that you are looking at, or actually more than two, but you have records from each of the individual schools, but then you have what they call the cumulative record, and the cumulative record seems to contradict the individual records, right? So especially in New York, and I don't mean to get sidetracked, but Jesus fucking Christ, New York is turning into its own fucking Pandora's box. So in 1952, we have allegedly Marguerite and Lee Harvey Oswald, August of 1952. They leave from Dallas, where they were staying at the 7801 Ewing address. That's at least the address that's on all the stuff about then. But then again, that Ewing address was used on a document in 1945. Along with the Collinwood address. Why would those two addresses be on a document in 1945? Either A, they're fake, or B, that these people stayed in houses that were in a circuit of houses to stay in, run by CIA spooks. So, I don't see any evidence of Harvey Oswald attending Beauregard prior to January. The records have two different contradicting pieces of information. One says he started their school on January 1st, but no one goes to school on January 1st ever anywhere in history. So it would have to have been after that. The other date is January the 14th, which makes more sense, but that still seems a little bit too delayed to go back to school. I would think the actual date is probably halfway through there. A couple more days after New Year's, and the following Monday, you're back at school, right? So we're splitting hairs here. But ultimately, I have Harvey Oswald in New Orleans attending Beauregard starting January of 1954. I don't have a place for Lee Harvey Oswald to live until at the earliest April, and most likely May, when Marguerite and Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly move into the 1454 St. Mary's, which is owned and operated by her old friend, Myrtle Evans, whose husband, Julius Evans, remembers both Lee and Marguerite as having lived there. And they lived there from May of 1954 till roughly May of 1955, which is contradicted by the postmarks that we have on the envelopes that were sent to John Pick in October of 1954. In October 1954, Marguerite mails a letter to John Pick, which indicates it's the real Marguerite because the other Marguerite didn't have anything to do with John Pick. So the real Marguerite sends a letter to John Pick in New York, October 1954, and it's coming from the 126 Exchange Place address. So as you can tell, there are some shenanigans going on with addresses, particularly surrounding 126 Exchange Place, but we're kind of getting off the beaten path here. Ultimately, when you study New York, you start to realize that the dates that they tell us of certain events don't seem to make sense. There seem to be references to schools that are not in the official story. Like right at this point in time, I have found two separate references to Oswald having attended PS 47 in New York. PS 47, but he attended PS 44. Well, that seems to be part of the problem. And then that makes you wonder if the records are doctored after the fact. Because Oswald, when you go through all the documents, it appears as though he's picked up in April, like April 14th, give or take, or April 17th. And then he's held until May the 6th, right? He's held until May the 6th, where he has been at the youth house, and then he's allegedly released. However, we have a contradicting document that shows that Lee Harvey Oswald was at youth house in the Bronx, not the one on 12th in Manhattan, but in the Bronx, a week before that, around the 10th of April, 1943. Now, all this stems from warrants that were issued around, I think they were issued in March, but the initial complaints came down in January. So Lee Harvey Oswald had been a truant. He goes to Trinity, then he's transferred to 117, and he's a truant at both, basically. But PS 117 is the public school. PS 117 is the one that will be filing a report with the City of New York Juvenile Detention Bureau. And it is those warrants that he has picked up on, right? So he's not picked up on warrants that came out of PS 44. He's picked up on warrants that came out of PS 117. But it would then appear that since he's not going to school at PS 44, additional warrants will be submitted for him, right? So we have this overlap of an understanding of where these things originated. PS 117, PS 44, and it is at this time. And see, here's the problem with PS 44. All the indications show that PS 44 is in the Bronx, but the notations that are made both to the Warren Commission and by Robert Oswald in his book Lee, both of them make reference to PS 44 as having been on streets that are in Manhattan, right where a PS 44 in Manhattan was, right? So there is some obfuscation there, and every time I think that I have all the documents, I don't. Every time I think I have documents, completed documents, I find more documents that show that I didn't have all the documents before. So, yes, the layers of this onion, which is Oswald in New York City, is growing more complex. The layers, to make an analogy, are like they're thinner and closer stuck together, and they're all transparent, right? So it's like trying to peel layers of tape apart from each other. But I'm getting there slowly but surely. But what it appears as though is in New York is that both Oswalds were there. Both were living at two different addresses. Some of those addresses they went to great lengths to suppress. And ultimately, we're looking at documentation of two different Oswalds being held at two different youth houses, one in the Bronx and one in Manhattan. That is what it appears to me as a knee-jerk reaction on the surface data. Of course, I'm probably correct, but I will admit that needs further delving, which I'm trying to get all this stuff done because I'm going to be making a documentary with my business partner, Chris Matthew of Forbidden Knowledge News. We're going to be doing a full-on Kennedy documentary based on the book. And then once that's done, I'll be doing a documentary on all this dual Oswald stuff, correcting John Armstrong's record. And at some point in time, I have to write another book, right? So that's kind of what all this stuff is working towards. I've got about 400 to 500 slides. Right now it's about 400. It's going to be 500 slides plus by the time I'm done on all this dual Oswald stuff, on his history, on the school records, on New York, everything up until the time that he leaves the Marines, September 11th, 1959. I kind of wrap up all this research in September of 59. I try not to get to October because once you get to October, you start to get into the Marion Likes and Billy Joe Lord in Europe and all that, and I don't want to fucking deal with that yet. Like, I just don't. I don't want to deal with Russia or none of that stuff yet. Because I'm going to work out every single last fucking minute detail of this dual Oswald stuff all through his early life. That's priority number one for me. So, getting back to Marguerite Oswald, it's clear that she was in New York in the early 40s. She was definitely part of this Navy Waves program, as logic would dictate. And then she goes back to New York in 1952, 1953, and they leave in January 54, so they're there for 2 years and about 3 or 4 months.
You ever get the feeling the city walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating your soul? You crave wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe chase some elk, fish a private stream. Well, listen up. There's a whole world out there, and finding your own piece of it just got easier. Head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forest, mountains, you name it. Search by acreage, location, the kind of hunting or fishing you dream of. Land.com. It's where the adventure begins.
Hey guys, it is Ryan. I'm not sure if you know this about me, but I'm a bit of a fun fanatic when I can. I like to work, but I like fun too. And now I can tell you about my favorite place to have fun, Chumba Casino. They have hundreds of social casino style games to choose from with new games released each week. You can play for free and each day brings a new chance to collect daily bonuses. So join me in the fun. Sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Allegedly, minus the time that they go to North Dakota, which I don't have a reason to not buy into the North Dakota stories. I just don't. Multiple people put them there, so it's, unless those people just colluded together to fucking come up with a story and not make any money off it, then hey, sure. But no, at the moment, it seems as though North Dakota is definitely still on the table. So, Marguerite Oswald, between August of 1952 and, let's say, May of 1954, just under 2 years, it's a very questionable time period. We have major conflicts with addresses. We have major conflicts with school records. We have major conflicts with the probationary records and the youth house records. We have documentation of Oswald having been at two different youth houses at the exact same time, give or take. Then we have the contradictory statements of Marguerite Oswald, the Marguerite Oswald imposter, who says that she saw her son taken from her in court And then she had to go visit him at the Warwick Youth House. But Warwick hasn't come up again in the conversation. If anything, Warwick is Spofford. But the thing about the Spofford Youth House that I haven't mentioned yet is that it didn't become an official extension of Youth House until 1957, which is way after Oswald's already left there. So that causes me some concern. There are references to Oswald having been taken to Spofford Youth House in 1954. But here's the thing. In 1954, it was not a facility that was directly associated with Youth House. It was another facility that only held 100 people. And it was initially a program for delinquent girls, but it was unorganized. It didn't really have its shit together in 1954. But I did gather that the Spofford facility did have a youth intake program, but it was burgeoning at that point. It was brand new, number one, from what I read, 1954. And this is 1953 that he would have allegedly been there. But the building was there, the facility was there. And so that's causing me some concern, because what that would indicate to me is that if Oswald was sent to the Spofford Youth House, or one of them was sent to the Spofford Youth House in the Bronx, that indicates to me that he got a very special slot in a very exclusive program that wasn't even really up to snuff to get certified and to get the seal of approval from the state of New York. That took another couple years. In 1957, the Spofford facility took over Youth House and they shut down the 12th Street facility. So, what's one to make of that? What is one to make of the notion that the Spofford Youth House is not really a youth house facility, but it's documented he was sent there? What are we to make of that? I don't know. I just don't know. And these people, when they're interviewed, Evelyn Siegel, I think her name was, or Spiegel, when she's interviewed, and when all the people are interviewed, and the head of the youth house, her name is Cohen. Just so you were clear, the head of the youth house at the time, her name was Cohen, Cohen. I'm sure you can pick up what I'm putting down. There are numerous references to studying them, to studies that these children sent there were involved in. And when I hear about counselors and studies going on and disruptive kids, I just think CIA and, not necessarily MK Ultra, because I think that's mostly a front program for weapons programs. But I definitely see some CIA connections, and Renatus Hartogs allegedly had some CIA connections too. We'll get to Hartogs eventually. But yeah, so that's what I wanted to say about New York and Oswald and all this stuff. There's way more than meets the eye, and I'm still trying to sort through it. But yes, it appears that both of the Oswalds were arrested in New York. One went to the Spofford Youth House. The other went to the 12th Street Youth House. They were both there about the same time, give or take a week. God, everything these guys do seem to be a week off. Like all the training programs in the Marines that Oswald allegedly went through being a week behind, So let me touch on that really quickly. The Oswald Marine stuff is starting to really come together thanks to the testimony of Richard Sear, C-Y-R. Sear names the boat that he was on with Oswald when he was on guard duty, which connected to Corregidor and connected to the Philippines, before Lee Oswald gets to Subic Point and we have the Martin Strand incident, which when you look at the dates and you look at all the information, to me, I've almost got it completely worked out on how they did the swaparoo between the two Oswalds when it comes to Corregidor and Subic Point with Martin Strand. And I'm pretty goddamn sure Martin Strand got caught in the middle. And so did his brother, who accidentally fell off a fucking Navy fucking ship in calm waters a couple months later. Yeah, but the Strand boys were suicided for sure. I wonder if Oswald had an order it was okay for him to take out anybody who discovered the secret. I wonder if that's a thing. All right, so let's continue on with A Mother in History by Jean Stafford, based on interviews with Marguerite Oswald. Hey, you know something? When I looked into this book, it turns out the original tapes, I guess, is about 6 hours of tape recordings from these interviews. They're right here in Colorado. They're at one of the universities. Probably not here in Fort Collins, but I think down in Boulder, or perhaps Denver. One of the colleges around here has the original tapes. So I might consider going and listening to them if I can get access. All right, here we are, page 66 in A Mother in History. In the most abrupt and perfunctory parenthesis possible, she said that it was time for more iced tea, and raising her voice above the chattering of ice cubes as she briskly stirred our glasses of strange brew, she lectured and invoked and apostrophized without transition and with a grand, if confounding, disregard for chronology. Immediately after she had served up Representative Ford's head on a platter, she took the Secret Service to task. The Secret Service would not let me get near my daughter-in-law. I fought and fought like a wild animal. I called the head of the Secret Service, I guess, every day, begging to see my daughter-in-law, and they wouldn't let me get near her. So she changed her testimony. First it was, Lee was a good man. Lee did nothing wrong, and Lee no kill nobody. And then I was pushed out, absolutely pushed out, and Marina Oswald's husband was a louse. Now I arrived in Dallas on March the 9th at the height of the Ruby trial and was told by reporters, and I can verify this, that Mrs. Payne was in Marina's house. But the point I'm going to make, and make strongly, is that I do not think it was fair that Mrs. Payne spoke with Marina Oswald before Mrs. Payne herself testified. Now, I didn't have the opportunity, or my sons. I never talked to John Edward or Robert or Marina or vice versa, so no one in the close family knew what each other was going to say. And this is very sad because we could have understood each other a little better rather than bog each other down as it came out some time. But Mrs. Payne did have that privilege to talk to my daughter-in-law, and this I don't like. This I don't like one bit. Why did the Secret Service let this strange woman see my daughter-in-law and not me? But the Secret Service never questioned me, nor the FBI either. The Secret Service and the FBI never came near me. But you have been interviewed, I said, because there have been flashed before my inward eyes newspaper stories, and without her number. Oh, yes, of course I've been interviewed by the newspapers, if that's what you mean, she said crossly, still put out by having been given the cold shoulder by the FBI and the Secret Service. I've been interviewed by them by the galore. Now, let me give you an instance of how I hold a lot of these cards that will show up the inaccuracies and the errors. About the diary, you asked about that. I had not asked about the diary. In fact, I had forgotten its existence. Possibly the question had come from someone nearer the front of the house. It has never been verified how the diary was leaked. It said in one article that no one knew where the diary came from, but a certain reporter in Dallas interviewed the widow, Mrs. Marina, quite often, so it implied that this is where the diary came from. And he refused to release where it came from, but she and her attorney expressed indignation about the release of the diary and so on.
You ever get that feeling like the concrete jungle's closing in? You crave wide open spaces, the chance to chase your own dinner, or just breathe clean air. Well, listen up. There's a whole world out there waiting, and finding your piece of it just got easier. Head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, you name it. Search by acreage, price, location. They've got it all. No matter what kind of wild dream you're chasing, land.com can help you find the ground to make it a reality. So quit dreaming. Head over to land.com, find your open space, and get out there.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply.
And they sent telegrams to the Warren Commission saying they didn't think it was right that the Warren Commission was going to investigate and the FBI. So I just sat and waited. I smile inwardly quite a bit when I read about myself, I smile and say, oh goodness, how can you be so wrong? Only way I can survive to have a little sense of humor. So I was smiling and waiting. This is good. All this, the FBI is going to check, I'm waiting and waiting, but no one came. So after the third day, I called the FBI, which is in Dallas, and I forget the man's name. I told who I was, and I said, I've been waiting for someone to come over and question me about the release of the so-called diary, and nobody has. And he said, well, do you have the diary, Ms. Oswald? And I said, no, I don't. But I just can't imagine all the fuss about the diary and not coming and asking if I released the diary. He said, they didn't come because they knew you didn't have it. And I said, yes, they know I didn't have it because they released it themselves. Now do you have an idea of what I'm talking about? Why, this just insults my intelligence. For 1 second, I was carried back in time to a winter when I had been a student at the University of Heidelberg. One afternoon, an American friend and I were moseying through Woolworths on the Hauptstrasse. We found this a good way to pick up the German words for miscellaneous hardware. When we saw a Japanese student at the stationery counter having a plainly fruitless conversation with the clerk, my friend Hightower, now a distinguished sinologist at Harvard, had a smattering of Japanese and was as much impelled, I think, to show it off as it was to do a good turn. The Japanese was grateful. Oh, I love how she just called him the Japanese. Fucking love it. The Japanese was grateful. He had wanted gummed reinforcements for his loose-leaf notebook, and we fell into a ridiculous conversation. All of us had a little German. The Japanese had a few snippets of English, about as many as Hightower had of Japanese. Our communication, for some reason, seemed to us worthy and charming, and we continued it out to the streets into the condilatore, where we became fast friends before we had finished our coffee. After that, for several months, Herr Hightower and I met once or twice a week. Together, we read Ulysses, holding the text in 3 languages. At any rate, it seems to me we did. I dare say we tried it once and gave up. Somehow, the snap went out of Joyce's puns when we tried them on German and Japanese. What little German we had diminished and grew deformed, and we began to forget our own languages. We remained friends, but I think that when we met for coffee, we read to ourselves and simply smiled at one another from time to time. Mrs. Oswald's conversation with the FBI man about the diary left me in just as deep water as I had been in when I had tried to understand Hightower's elucidation in German of Joyce's play, The Metempsychosis to High. You see, they have never questioned me about one thing, she went on. What I'm trying to say is that the normal thing is that they should have been at my door right away. I could have had the diary. It was my son's diary, but I was never questioned. So the proof of the pudding is that they knew it was absolutely leaked, and they let it die down. You didn't hear any more about it, you see. This is a good example because I could have had the diary. If they were sincere, they could have just come to me. Let's face it. 1 and 1 just don't make 2. My book is going to be called 1 and 1 Don't Make 2, or this and that. They're concerned about the diary, and everybody's investigating. But nobody comes and asks this old mother if she had the diary and she released it. So I never believed that it was my son's diary. I grew increasingly muddled as she escorted me down cul-de-sacs through woods, which significantly she felt could not be seen for the trees. As various as the terrae incognitae were the points of time at which we traversed them. Sometimes I was in New Orleans, listening to Lee as he sang Silent Night with a nice little voice. But at the next moment, I was at Six Flags Motel with the Madame Marguerite and Marina Oswald after the boy's murder, and Johnny on the spot. Life magazine was there infiltrating the ranks of cops. I examined the contents of Lee's sea bag when he came across back from Formosa. He carried with him... Hang on a second. Life magazine was there, infiltrating the ranks of cops. Of course, because the Life magazine was a CIA operation, if you didn't know. C.D. Jackson running that shit. Give me a fucking break. I examined the contents of Lee's sea bag when he came back from Formosa. He carried with him a book of Christmas carols and a Christmas card from his mother, which she had sent him in 1956. I went to Washington with her to hear the hearings before. Okay, so this is the big fucking question right here, which caught my attention so clearly. I examined the contents of Lee's sea bag when he came back from Formosa. So the implication is here, he went to Formosa, which is Philippines. Or it's Formosa, Taiwan. Formosa's Taiwan, forgive me. Formosa is Taiwan. So she went through his bag when he got back from Philippines. When was he in Philippines? He was in Philippines from... This is the first trip in 57. He was in the Philippines from November 16th, right? He gets on the boat on the 16th. The boat officially technically leaves on the 20th. And he is there until the end of March, right? Because he's in Subic Point in the beginning, all through... I believe January 11th or 12th, after the Martin Strand incident. Then from there, he is sent to Corregidor, and he gets to Corregidor middle of January, and he's at Corregidor until March the 18th. Then he ends up in the fucking brig and all that stuff. He's in the brig from June 27th, 58 until August the 13th. Then he will hop on a fucking boat, the Skagit, and he will go to Taiwan, Formosa. That occurs in September of 1958. Remember, then he has the guard duty incident in Formosa, witnessed by... who was the witness to that? Richards, or I forget which guy was the witness to that. But so from there, he is then sent back on October the 6th. He's sent by plane back to Atsugi. So she's got to be talking about... So, and then he came back a month later. So the time period she's talking about has to have been February of 1959, because he's back. No, let me think. So if he's back at the end of... Okay, no, so it would have been December of 58. December of 1958. That's the period that she's talking about. The reason it would have been such a big deal is if it was a year earlier, December 57, then it could have fallen in line with all of the Palmer McBride stuff. Oh, comment on Palmer McBride real quickly. I'm starting to discount that Palmer McBride knew the person that we know as Oswald. I'm pretty sure he worked with somebody who worked there under the name Lee Harvey Oswald, but it was not either of our Oswalds. I have both of them out there in the Far East until absolute minimum, February or March of 1958, which completely shoots holes in the time frame that Palmer McBride could have worked with another Oswald at Pfister Dental Lab. What does this mean? This means Oswald number 3, ladies and gentlemen. Diana has suggested that this could be Gordon Novell, because Gordon Novell owned a motorcycle at the time, grew up in New Orleans, was there at the time. It's a possibility. I'll have to dig into that. But who else could it have been? Could it have been Robert Oswald? Well, technically, it could have been. Although he would have been married at this point, and technically, I think, living in Davenport, on the Davenport address, right? So that makes it a little more difficult for Robert to start doing some of these impersonations of Lee. And unfortunately, I've kind of eliminated Robert Oswald as having been a duplicate of Lee in the Marines because the timing just didn't work. He was out of the Marines by July of 55. And so even Donald Goodwin, who said that he saw Oswald working in a radio unit in 55 or 56, and a couple of the other guys who knew him in 55, 56. That's after the time that Robert Oswald is out of the Marines. So we can kind of eliminate him from, I think, the majority of possible duplicate Lee sightings, right? So yes, I just took us on a great big detour to nowhere. So I apologize for that. But let me continue. I examined the contents of Lee's sea bag when he came back from Formosa, which we just determined was in early or late 58, November, December 58. He carried with him a book of Christmas carols and a Christmas card from his mother, which I had sent him in 1956. I went to Washington with her to the hearings before the Warren Commission and stayed in a suite of rooms the size of a house, dining room, grand piano, everything. I was haunted by the spectral figures of unnamed Secret Servicemen with a lot of accounting to do, by FBI men who had stayed away from her door, high officials who blew their tops when Mrs. Oswald asked them direct questions. I saw a copy of the letter written to Khrushchev. She keeps a copy of everything she writes. I saw a Mother's Day card signed Lee that had come from Russia in 1960, and I saw the subpoena requiring her to appear instanter at the Ruby trial. Sheer perseverance had won her this peremptory invitation. She had been barred from the courtroom. The tapes were finally used up, and the ashtray beside me was full of cigarette stubs. We stood up, and both of us stretched like women who had done a hard day's work cleaning out the cellar and putting up rhubarb. The room was disheveled with exhibits, and the furniture was still out of place where we had moved it to accommodate the tape recorders. I offered to help Mrs. Oswald tidy up, but she said, No, I have another thing. I was hoping I could give you a bite of supper, but I suppose you can't stay. No, I can't, I said. I'm sorry. She laughed. If you can't, you can't, she said, parroting a broad A that does not exist in my speech. You go on back to Dallas now, and you be fresh for tomorrow, because we've still got a lot to talk about, you hear? Tomorrow. She was struck with a numbing thought. Tomorrow is Mother's Day, and I will go to Lee Harvey Oswald's grave, but I will be a mother alone, a mother in history, alone on Mother's Day. A vaporing cloak of wistfulness enveloped her for no longer than the twinkling of an eye. Resourceful woman, she found a dandy solution to her dilemma, and gaily, as if she were planning a picnic or a frisk through an amusement park, she said, I know, I'll take you. All right, that brings us to part 3. We're on page 77. Got about 35 pages to go, and we will wrap this thing up tomorrow, if I can not ramble for half an hour first. So, thanks, everybody. Tune in later on for a brand new Bloody History World War II. And that's going to do it for me, guys. I will see y'all tomorrow.
You ever get the feeling the city walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating your soul? You crave wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe chase some elk, fish a private stream. Well, listen up. There's a whole world out there, and finding your own piece of it just got easier. Head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forest, mountains, you name it. Search by acreage, location, the kind of hunting or fishing you dream of. Land.com. It's where the adventure begins.
How to have fun, anytime, anywhere. Step 1. Go to ChumbaCasino.com.
ChumbaCasino.com. Got it.
Step 2. Collect your welcome bonus.
Come to Papa welcome bonus.
Step 3. Play hundreds of casino-style games for free.
That's a lot of games. All for free?
Step 4. Unleash your excitement.
Woohoo!
Chumba Casino has been delivering thrills for over a decade. So claim your free welcome bonus now and live the Chumba life. Visit ChumbaCasino.com.
VGW Group. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.